Life is too short to be worried over things we can't control. And the more you worry, the more it steals your joy away. I used to tell myself that every morning while tying my apron at Meridian Grille. But it's hard to find joy when you're living in a world where even the air you breathe feels like it's been pre-approved by a man who treats the city like his personal chessboard. Right now, I'm sitting in a penthouse that costs more than my entire family's history, holding this. Maya holds up a small weathered silver locket with a distinct insignia. It's small, right? Almost fragile. But as I hold it, I can see James, the man who supposedly rules everything, standing by the floor-to-ceiling window. His eyes are wide, his hands are actually trembling, and for the first time in a year, the power dynamic has shifted. No one expected a waitress to find the one thing that could bring a titan to his knees. Keep watching, because the truth behind this object will blow your mind. My day started like every other day for the last 6 months, under the silent, suffocating watch of the suit. That's what I call the black Mercedes that's always 3 spaces away. I don't go to the grocery store alone. I don't go for a jog alone. I don't even choose my own coffee anymore. It just appears on my table, exactly how I like it, before I can even ask. It's called protection, or so he says. But when you aren't allowed to see the face of the person protecting you, it starts to feel a lot like being a high-value inmate. I remember the first time I felt the shift, the moment I stopped being a person and started being a priority. I was closing up the grill, tired, my feet aching, when I saw him, James Kang. He didn't look like a monster then. He just sat in my section every Tuesday, ordered his steak medium rare, and watched me. Not with lust that I could handle. He watched me with a focused intensity, like he was waiting for me to break a rule I didn't even know existed. Before I even tell you what happened, let me ask you this. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted most? If you have, you'll feel this story deep in your soul. And if you know that kind of pain, hit subscribe. Not because it helps me, but because stories like this remind us that sometimes silence and strength are the best revenge. She thinks I'm looking at her because she's beautiful. She is, of course, a sharp, vibrant contrast to the gray, sterile world I run. But that's not why I'm here. I'm here because she's the only thing in this city that doesn't lie to me. When Maya drops a tray, she swears. When a customer is rude, her eyes flash with a fire she tries to hide. She's real. And in my world, real is a liability. I've broken every rule of my organization for her. I've put guards on a woman who doesn't even know her ex-boyfriend was sent to prison just to keep him away from her. I tell myself it's kindness. I tell myself I'm keeping her safe. But as I watch her, I know the truth. I'm not protecting her from the world. I'm preparing her for mine. He finally approached me on a rainy Tuesday. The restaurant was nearly empty. "You're late with the coffee, Maya," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it filled the room. It had that smooth, dangerous edge, like velvet over a blade. "I didn't know you were keeping a stopwatch, Mr. Kang," I replied, setting the cup down a little too hard. He didn't get angry. He actually chuckled, a low sound that made the hair on my arm stand up. "I keep track of everything that matters to me." He reached out, his fingers hovering just an inch from my wrist, never touching. But I could feel the heat. It was the most intimate thing I'd ever experienced, and we hadn't even made contact. You think you're free because you get to walk out that door at 10 p.m., he whispered, leaning in. But the world is a hungry place, Maya. Wouldn't you rather be fed by a lion than hunted by wolves? I didn't have an answer then. I just felt this terrifying pull, this dilemma between the chaos of my struggling independence and the seductive, chilling security of his shadow. I wanted to run, and I wanted to stay. I didn't realize that by the time he finished his coffee, the choice had already been made for me. You know what hurts the most? Not what they did, but that I still tried to make them proud after everything. If you've ever given people too many chances, you already understand this pain. Don't just scroll. Subscribe. Join people who've been through it too, because you deserve stories that make you feel seen. They say you don't know what you have until it's gone, but nobody talks about the chill that sets in when something you hated suddenly disappears. For 2 years, my ex Damon was the ghost that wouldn't stop haunting me. He was the unpaid debt of my life, always showing up at the grill, always leaning over the counter with that same arrogant smirk, making sure I knew he still had a grip on my peace of mind. Then one Wednesday, the air just changed. Damon didn't show up. Not on Thursday, not on Friday. I checked his social media. Dark. I called a mutual friend, and her voice sounded tight, like she was afraid of her own phone. He's gone, Maya. Just dropped off the map. Don't ask me again. I should have felt light. I should have danced in my tiny kitchen. But instead, I sat at my table and stared at the fresh coffee sitting there. The coffee I hadn't ordered, delivered by a waiter who wouldn't look me in the eye. My eyes drifted to the window. 3 spaces down, the black Mercedes sat idling. Its windows were dark, like 2 empty eyes watching my every move. I walked straight to the car. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but I was done being a passenger in my own life. I tapped on the glass. It rolled down just an inch. "Where is he?" I whispered. The driver didn't answer. He just handed me a phone. It was already ringing. "He was a parasite, Maya." James's voice came through the line, sounding as calm as a Sunday morning. "I simply removed the infestation. You were losing sleep. Now you won't." I felt sick. Not because I missed Damon, but because I realized James didn't just have money. He had the power to make people stop existing. He was playing God with my life, and he thought he was doing me a favor. When I finally stood my ground, they called me heartless. But tell me, where were they when I was breaking? If you've ever had to choose peace over people, this channel is your space. Subscribe, not for me, but for every quiet soul who took their power back. She's angry. I can see it in the way she grips the phone, her knuckles turning white. She calls it interference. I call it maintenance. In my world, if you leave a weed in your garden, it eventually chokes the life out of everything beautiful. Damon was a weed. I didn't kill him, not yet. But I made sure he understood that Seoul is no longer his home. I want her to breathe. I want her to look at the horizon and not over her shoulder. But the more I clear her path, the more she looks at me like I'm the one she needs to run from. It's a bitter pill, knowing that to keep her safe, I have to become her greatest fear. I tried to ignore it. I tried to go back to my normal life. But the mall incident changed everything. I was at the Westfield complex, just trying to buy a pair of shoes for work. A guy bumped into me, hard. He started shouting, getting in my face, looking like he wanted to pick a fight for no reason. Before I could even open my mouth to apologize, 4 men in gray suits appeared out of the crowd. They didn't shout. They didn't make a scene. They just formed a wall around me. One of them put a hand on the guy's chest and whispered something. The guy's face went gray. He practically tripped over himself trying to get away. One of the gray suits turned to me. Mr. Kang wishes for you to finish your shopping in peace, Miss Maya. We will be right here. I looked around the mall. For the first time, I didn't see shoppers. I saw a perimeter. I saw an escort. Every person who looked at me too long was being cataloged by men I didn't know. My freedom was just a longer leash. James wasn't just watching me. He had turned the entire city into my cage. I realized then that I wasn't being protected from a threat. I was being claimed. And in James Kang's world, once you're claimed, there is no such thing as just a waitress anymore. They say money can't buy happiness, but in my world, money is the difference between breathing and drowning. My sister Tasha is my entire heart. She's the reason I smile through 12-hour shifts at the grill and the reason I save every nickel. But when her tuition bill arrived with a paid in full stamp, followed by a letter from the hospital saying her mounting medical debt had been settled by a private donor, I didn't feel happy. I felt like I'd just been sold. I didn't have to guess who did it. I walked out of the apartment, ignored the black Mercedes for once, and hailed a cab straight to the Kang commercial district. I stormed past the front desk, my heart thumping against my ribs like a trapped bird. When I reached his office, James didn't even look up from his desk. He just sat there, surrounded by glass and steel, looking like he owned the very sun. Why? I demanded, throwing the receipts onto his mahogany desk. I didn't ask for your charity, James. I don't want your money. He looked up then. His eyes weren't cold. They were worse. They were sympathetic. It wasn't charity, Maya. It was an investment in your peace. You were working yourself into a grave. If you're exhausted, you're distracted. And if you're distracted, you're in danger. So you just bought my life? I felt the tears stinging my eyes, and I hated myself for it. You think because you paid some bills, I belong to you now? He stood up, walking around the desk with that slow, predatory grace. He didn't touch me, but he stood close enough that I could smell the expensive cedar and tobacco on his skin. I think that you are now free to focus on things other than survival. If that feels like belonging to me, perhaps you should ask yourself why you're so afraid to let someone carry your weight. I wanted to scream. I wanted to hit him. But as I looked at those receipts, I realized the trap was perfect. If I gave the money back, Tasha suffered. If I kept it, I was his. He hadn't just paid my debts. He had become my debt. And James Kang always collects. Sometimes revenge isn't about payback. It's about peace. And if this story touched you, subscribe right now. Because somewhere out there, another person is watching in silence, needing a reminder that they're not alone. And your one click might help them find it. I watched her face crumble and then harden. It broke my heart, but it was necessary. I need her to understand that the world she lived in, the one where she thought she could work her way to safety, is a myth. Tonight, I'm bringing her into the reality. I've invited her to a dinner with the heads of the syndicate. It's a gamble. My associates think I've gone soft, that I'm distracted by a pretty waitress. I need them to see that she isn't a distraction. She's an extension of my power. If they see her as my weakness, they will try to kill her. If they see her as my heart, they will fear her. I just hope she can survive the look of the monster she's about to meet. The dress arrived at 6 p.m. It was deep emerald silk, the kind of fabric that felt like water against my skin. There was no note, just the driver waiting outside. I put it on because I knew I didn't have a choice. I wasn't Maya the waitress tonight. I was a trophy. The restaurant James took me to didn't have a name. It was tucked behind a nondescript door in an alleyway. But inside, it was a palace of gold and shadows. When we walked in, the entire room went silent. 6 men, all in tailored suits with eyes like sharks, sat at a long table. James pulled out my chair, his hand lingering on my shoulder for a split second longer than necessary. It was a claim, a warning to everyone in the room. "She doesn't speak Korean," one of the men said, not even looking at me. "Why is she here, James? This is business." "She is my business," James replied, his voice dropping an octave. The man laughed, a dry, rasping sound. "A waitress from the West? You're risking the territory for a girl who pours coffee for a living." James didn't raise his voice. He didn't even reach for a weapon. He just leaned forward, his face illuminated by the candlelight. "She isn't just a girl. She's the woman who made me realize I've been too patient with men like you." The tension in the room was so thick I could barely swallow. I looked at the man who had insulted me, and for the first time, I didn't feel afraid. I felt James's power behind me like a shield, but as I looked around the table at the cold, calculating faces, I realized I wasn't at a dinner. I was at a declaration of war, and I was the reason the first shot was about to be fired. You ever feel like you're playing a game where everyone else has the rule book, and you're just trying not to trip over your own feet? That was me at that Syndicate dinner. I was supposed to be the quiet, protected heart James talked about, but my conscience didn't get the memo. When the man across from us started bragging about how they cleared out a local neighborhood to make room for a new development, I didn't see a business deal. I saw families like mine being thrown onto the street. "Is that what you call it?" I asked, the words out of my mouth before I could stop them. "Clearing out? My neighborhood was cleared out 5 years ago. We called it a tragedy. You call it a Tuesday?" The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush a person. James's hand tightened on my shoulder, not a caress, but a warning. I had just unintentionally embarrassed the King of Seoul in front of the very men he needed to impress. I saw the flick of doubt in the other boss's eyes. They didn't see a partner anymore. They saw a man who couldn't even control the woman at his side. James didn't look at me. He just took a slow sip of his wine. "Maya is passionate," he said, but his voice had a jagged edge I'd never heard before. I thought I was in for it when we got home. I expected the lecture, the cold shoulder, or the doubled security. Instead, I got a knock on my door at midnight. It wasn't James. It was his second in command, the one everyone called the ice picker. He handed me a folder. "He won't tell you this," he whispered, his eyes darting toward the hallway. "But that neighborhood you mentioned?" James didn't clear it. He's the one who secretly funded the legal battle to save the remaining blocks. He's been playing both sides to keep you safe and keep them satisfied. But the paper trail for that debt payment he made for your sister, it's sloppy. If the syndicate finds it, it's not just your freedom on the line. It's his life. I stared at the folder. For the first time, the cage didn't feel like it was built to keep me in. It felt like it was built to keep the truth from getting out. When I finally stood my ground, they called me heartless. But tell me, where were they when I was breaking? If you've ever had to choose peace over people, this channel is your space. Subscribe, not for me, but for every quiet soul who took their power back. She's a wildfire I can't contain, and tonight she nearly burned the whole house down. The Syndicate doesn't value passion, they value predictability. By speaking up, Maya didn't just challenge them. She exposed the one thing I've been trying to hide, my humanity. Now they're looking for cracks. They'll look at my ledgers, my donations, and eventually they'll find the link to her sister. I told her I was removing obstacles, but I've actually been building a monument of evidence against myself. I should be angry at her. I should send her away for my own survival. But as I watch her through the security feed, clutching that folder, I realize I'd rather lose the empire than lose the only person who looks at me and sees a man instead of a monster. I couldn't sleep. The folder sat on my lap like a ticking bomb. James had paid my sister's debt with money that was supposed to be clean, but he'd moved it through a shell company linked to a rival family. It was a mistake. A messy human mistake born out of an obsession to save me. I walked into his study. He was sitting in the dark, the city lights reflecting off his glass desk. "I know," I said, dropping the folder. "You weren't supposed to," he replied, not looking up. "My people are loyal to the brand, Maya, not necessarily to the man. Someone is helping you because they want to see me fail. Or maybe they're helping me because they want you to survive," I countered. I walked behind him, and for the first time, I was the one who initiated the touch. I put my hands on his shoulders. He felt like stone. "You've been so busy watching me that you stopped watching your back." "I have everything under control," he insisted, but his voice lacked its usual steel. "No, you don't. You have a cage, James. And the problem with cages is that eventually the person outside gets tired of holding the key." We sat in that silence, the power shifting in the room like a physical weight. I realized then that James wasn't my captor anymore. He was my liability, and if I wanted to keep my sister safe and keep him alive, I couldn't just be the girl in the black dress. I had to become the person who fixed the mess he made for me. They say the safest place to hide is in plain sight, but they never tell you what happens when the floor beneath you starts to give way. I spent months thinking James was the one holding all the cards, but that folder changed everything. The clean money he used to save my sister was actually tied to a rival family's shell company. It wasn't just a mistake, it was a neon sign pointing right at his throat. And tonight, the shadows finally stepped into the light. I was in the penthouse kitchen, trying to breathe, when the main elevator chimed. It wasn't James. It was Min Seo, the woman from the restaurant who'd warned me about the version of James I was seeing. She didn't look like a business rival tonight. She looked like an executioner. She threw a tablet onto the counter. On the screen was the bank transfer James had made. He was so busy playing hero for a waitress that he forgot how to cover his tracks, she said, her voice like a razor. "This link to my family's accounts, it's enough to make the Syndicate believe James is a traitor. They don't care about your sister's health, Maya. They care about loyalty. And James just traded his for you." My heart stopped. I looked toward the study where James was working, oblivious. I realized that my safety had become his death warrant. Min Seo leaned in close, her perfume cloying and sweet. "I'm not here to kill you. I'm here to give you a head start. Leave now, and I might forget to show the Syndicate this for another 12 hours. Stay, and you can watch them tear him apart." James walked into the room then. He saw her, and for the first time, I saw real fear in his eyes, not for himself, but for the fact that his secrets were out. He didn't reach for a gun. He reached for my hand. The tension broke in a moment of raw, desperate intimacy. He kissed me, and it didn't feel like a romance. It felt like a goodbye. It was the kiss of two people who knew they were standing on a sinking ship. You know what hurts the most? Not what they did. But to that, I still tried to make them proud after everything. If you've ever given people too many chances, you already understand this pain. Don't just scroll. Subscribe. Join people who've been through it too, because you deserve stories that make you feel seen. I've spent 15 years building an empire out of ice and steel, and I let it all melt for a girl who pours coffee with a scowl. Mincio is right. The paper trail is a mess. I was so desperate to fix Maya's life that I used a back-channel account I haven't touched in a decade, one that traces back to her family. It was arrogant. It was sloppy. But as I look at Maya, standing there with her jaw set and her eyes burning, I realize she isn't going to run. She's looking at the tablet, looking at the evidence of my ruin, and she's not crying. She's calculating. I thought I was the one who was going to save her. But as the Syndicate sirens begin to wail in the distance, I realize I've just handed the keys to the kingdom to the only person who can actually save me. Mincio thought she was giving me an ultimatum. She thought I'd take the head start and run back to Georgia. But she doesn't know what it's like to be a waitress who survived on tips and grit for 10 years. You learn how to spot a bluff. You learn how to find the one thing a customer is hiding. You're not here to give me a head start, I said, ignoring James's hand and stepping toward her. If you wanted the Syndicate to kill him, you would have shown them the tablet already. You're here because you need something from him that only I can convince him to give up. I picked up the Silver Locket James had been so shaken by earlier. The object that held the encrypted keys to the Mafia's financial ledger. I held it up between us. James gasped, his face going pale. He hadn't realized I'd found where he hid it. He ruled Seoul, I whispered, my voice steady despite the shaking in my soul. But he broke his own rule the second he decided I was more important than the business. Now, the rule is mine. You want the ledgers to keep the Syndicate off your back, Mincio? Then you're going to help me wipe this paper trail clean. Or I'll drop this locket into the river and we can all burn together. No one expected this. Not the Mafia boss, not his rival, and definitely not the girl who used to worry about late fees. The rebellion didn't start with a gun. It started with me realizing that a cage is only a cage if you don't know how to pick the lock. They say power is a heavy crown, but nobody tells you how light it feels when you're the one finally holding the handle of the blade. For months, I was the girl being moved around like a pawn. But holding that silver locket felt like holding James's very heartbeat in the palm of my hand. This wasn't just jewelry. It was the encryption key to every bribe, every cent, and every life the Syndicate had ever touched. James stared at me, his face a mask of shock and a weird kind of pride. He had spent years making sure his security was an airtight drum, yet a waitress from Georgia had just picked his pocket while he was busy watching her sleep. The irony wasn't lost on him. But Mincio, she looked like she'd just seen a ghost. Her motivation wasn't just to destroy James. She needed those ledgers to prove to her own family that she could handle the throne. Without them, she was just as expendable as I was. You're playing a dangerous game, Maya, Mincio said, her eyes locked on the locket. You don't even know how to use what's in there. I don't need to know how to use it, I snapped, stepping closer to the balcony railing. The wind whipped my hair across my face, but I didn't blink. I just need to know how to destroy it. If this goes over the edge, your family stays in the dirt, and James's paper trail stays exactly where it is, unverified. You want to be the boss? Then you're going to help me scrub his name from that shell company right now. James finally found his voice. Maya, give it to me. My security team is already intercepting the Syndicate's hit squad. We can handle this the old way. The old way is why we're in this mess, James, I said, not looking back. The old way treats me like a liability. Today, I'm the one making the rules. You want to keep your empire? Then sit down and let me negotiate for your life. For the first time since I met him, the King of Seoul did exactly what he was told. He sat. The silence in that room was louder than any gunshot. I wasn't just his protected heart anymore. I was the architect of his survival. I've spent my life being the smartest man in the room, but I was blinded by my own obsession. I thought protecting Maya meant keeping her in a cage, but I never realized that the cage was only as strong as her willingness to stay. Now, she's the one holding the keys to my kingdom and my life. My security detail, men I've trained for a decade, are standing by, confused, waiting for a command I can't give. Mincio is trapped between her greed and her fear. I should be terrified that a waitress has dismantled my entire world in 5 minutes. Instead, all I can think about is how I never want to let her go. But the world doesn't care about our power shift. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A photo message, my blood turned to ice. It was Maya's sister, Tasha, being shoved into a van. The air in the room was electric until James's phone chirped. The look on his face told me everything before he even showed me the screen. Tasha, my sister, the girl I had traded my soul to keep safe. She was gone. Mincio, if this is you, I started, my voice shaking as I gripped the locket. It's not, Mincio said, her face genuinely turning pale. That's the Syndicate's internal cleanup crew. They don't wait for evidence, Maya. They saw James's sloppy payments, and they decided to take his leverage before they take his head. I felt the floor drop out from under me. All my big talk about rules and ledgers didn't mean a thing if Tasha was hurt. I looked at James. The monster I'd spent months fearing was the only one who could get her back, but he was compromised. His own people were the ones who took her. I can get her, James whispered, standing up slowly. The competence I'd always known, that cold, calculating steel, was back in his eyes. But I have to go rogue. I have to burn my own house down to find her. Are you ready to lose everything to save her? I looked at the silver locket. I looked at the man who had loved me into a corner. Everything is already gone, James. Just bring her home. When I finally stood my ground, they called me heartless. But tell me, where were they when I was breaking? If you've ever had to choose peace over people, this channel is your space. Subscribe, not for me, but for every quiet soul who took their power back. The truth is, I thought I was the only one paying a price, but I didn't realize that in James's world, every safety net is made of tripwires. The Syndicate didn't find us because they were geniuses. They found us because James's own ice picker was a mole who had been tracing our family records for months. James had kept Tasha's security local to her campus to avoid drawing attention, thinking a light touch was safer than a heavy hand. He was wrong. The second that international payment was flagged as an irregularity by the syndicate's auditors, the mole gave them Tasha's exact coordinates. She wasn't just a sister anymore. She was the only leverage left to bring a rogue boss to heel. James didn't hesitate. He didn't call his main team. He didn't check his ledgers. He just grabbed a burner phone and a heavy bag from the floor safe. "They took her because they think I'm weak for choosing you," he said, his voice a low vibrating hum of fury. "Tonight, I'm going to show them that a man with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous thing they've ever created." We were in a warehouse on the industrial edge of the city within the hour. The air smelled like salt and old grease. I saw Tasha tied to a chair in the center of the floor. 3 men standing over her with the same cold, shark-like eyes I'd seen at dinner. James didn't wait for a negotiation. He stepped into the light, his hands empty, but his presence weighing 10 tons. "I'm the one you want," James shouted. "The girl is just a waitress's sister. She's civilian. You touch her, and I drop the encryption keys into the harbor. You let her go, and you get me." One of the men laughed and raised a gun. I didn't even think. I stepped out from behind the crates, holding the silver locket high. "He's lying," I screamed. "I'm the one with the keys. You want the money? It's right here." The distraction worked for exactly 2 seconds, long enough for James to move. But as the first shot rang out, James didn't aim for them. He threw himself in front of me. I felt the wet heat of his blood spray across my face before I even heard the bang. He took a bullet meant for my heart, and as he slumped against me, the King of Seoul looked me in the eyes and whispered, "Run." The pain is a distant, dull thud compared to the absolute clarity of this moment. I've spent a year watching her, escorting her, and managing her life like a project, but as I lie here on this cold concrete, I realize I never truly saw her until now. She isn't running. My security detail, the ones who stayed loyal, are finally breaching the doors. But Maya isn't waiting for them. She's holding my shoulder, her hands covered in my blood, and she isn't crying. She's looking at the man who shot me with a cold, focused intensity that I usually only see in the mirror. I thought I had to be the monster to keep her safe, but I've accidentally raised a queen who knows how to handle the dark better than I ever did. World went silent after the shot. I didn't feel fear. I didn't feel shock. I just felt this deep burning click in my brain where the waitress died and something else took over. I've spent 10 years observing people, reading their moods for tips, noticing the guy at the corner table who's hiding a wedding ring. I noticed the way the shooter's hand drifted when he saw the locket. He wasn't a professional. He was a greedy mid-level grunt looking for a payday. "Tasha, get down," I screamed. The warehouse doors blew inward. James's loyalists flooded the room, but I didn't wait for the crossfire. I grabbed a heavy metal tray from a nearby workbench, a tool of my old trade, and swung it with everything I had into the shooter's throat while he was distracted by the breach. He went down gasping, and I didn't even blink. I reached James just as the room settled into a bloody, ringing quiet. Tasha was being untied by one of the guards, her eyes wide and terrified. I looked at James. He was pale, the emerald silk of his shirt ruined by the hole in his shoulder. "You stayed," he wheezed, a small pained smile touching his lips. "I told you," I whispered, pressing my hands against the wound to stop the leak. "We go wrong together, but from now on, we do it my way." I looked at his men, the killers, the thieves, the survivors. They weren't looking at James for orders anymore. They were looking at me. I held the silver locket up, its metal stained with James's blood. The Syndicate thought they could use my family to break their boss. They didn't realize they'd just given the Waitress a reason to burn their entire world to the ground. Sometimes revenge isn't about payback. It's about peace. And if this story touched you, subscribe right now. Because somewhere out there, another person is watching in silence, needing a reminder that they're not alone. And your one click might help them find it. They say you can't change a man, but they never said anything about changing the world he built. A week after the warehouse, the blood was gone from my hands, but the weight of what I'd become was just starting to settle in. James was alive, recovering in the penthouse under a security detail that now answered to me first. The mole had been purged, not with a bullet, but with the public exposure of his debts that made him a liability to everyone in the city. He didn't just lose his job, he lost his name. I sat at James's glass desk, the silver locket resting next to a laptop displaying the decrypted Syndicate ledgers. James stood by the window, his arm in a sling, watching me. He still rules publicly. To the streets and the sharks, he is still the King of Seoul, the force that keeps the chaos at bay. But the strategy, the decisions on where the money goes and whose life gets managed, those flow through me now. I called Mincio this morning. I didn't threaten her. I offered her a deal. She keeps her territory, but her family's financial cleanup happens through my new architecture. I recalibrated the Syndicate's leverage so that every bribe is now a two-way street. We aren't just protected anymore. We are the ones who define what safety looks like. We haven't been redeemed, and we certainly haven't been softened. We've just evolved. You're quiet, James said, stepping away from the glass. I'm thinking about the grill, I admitted. Thinking about how I used to worry about late fees while you were busy deciding who got to live another day. And now I realize that survival isn't a gift you give someone. It's a choice you make together. I stood up and handed him the locket. The encryption was changed. The back channels were scrubbed. The sloppy man he was for a moment had been replaced by a partnership that was twice as dangerous because it was twice as smart. He took the locket, but he didn't look at the metal. He looked at me. I ruled this city by fear, Maya. How do you plan to rule it? I walked to the door, checking my reflection one last time. I didn't see a waitress. I didn't even see a queen. I saw a woman who knew exactly how much the world cost. I'm going to rule it by making sure no one ever has to choose between their soul and their safety again. But if they make the wrong choice, they'll have to answer to me. We walked out together, the black Mercedes waiting 3 spaces away. Only this time, I was the one who held the keys. Sometimes revenge isn't about payback. It's about peace. And if this story touched you, subscribe right now. Because somewhere out there, another person is watching in silence, needing a reminder that they're not alone. And your one click might help them find it. Maya's journey from the coffee shop to the throne is just beginning, and the rules of Seoul are about to be rewritten in blood and silk. Subscribe to see what happens when the Waitress finally decides to stop serving and start leading. You won't want to miss the next chapter of the Empire.